Hey guys, so I guess we should talk about the end of that episode, huh? Where pretty much Hal basically appears right before Anna and Manta, and yeah, it's like just pretty much the fact that that happened at all. It not only shows just the balls on the balls on how to begin with that he's appearing before them, but it shows we know that Anna isn't gonna actually take anything he says seriously or even accept any offer he's got to help. But it's like just the fact that how himself appeared before him shows he is determined in order to show that the only ones who really matter in the end are him and Yo. Like he's making a statement with his appearance. That's really all he's doing. Um, but with that out of the way, though, one of the big things to talk about in this episode is we get to see what happened with Prince Ryu during his training. And going off what I said about last week's episode, I love how on top of getting more into that, we're also just getting more in depth with both Ryu and Tokigero, and it's all done within that single conversation between the two of them. Because in normal circumstances like this, like one would think after what happened that after what happened that 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 Prince Ryu would actually hold a grudge against Tokigero for what happened, but he didn't because in a lot of ways, just through meeting Tokigero again, he was able to he was able to relate in a lot of ways to Tokigero. Like just having a simple conversation with him, he was able to see a lot of even though they've had vastly different experiences. He was able to still see, like, he was still able to find common ground with him. Like in a lot of ways he when it came to Ryu and reconciling with Tokigero in this episode, he basically he ultimately saw within Tokigero a kindred spirit, if you will, someone who, despite not having walked entirely the same path or have had vastly different experiences, Ryu could still relate to and find that common ground with Tokigero. Even more so than that, though, for Ryu, he pretty much just wanted to save Tokigero. He In a lot of ways he wanted to do in a lot of ways what Prince Ryu was doing here is that he wanted to do with Prince Tokigero what Yo had done for him. It's thanks to Yo that Prince Ryu was able to embrace who he really was and not who he was pretending or tricked himself to be, and and he wanted to do the exact same thing for Tokigero, which is, to me, not only what makes Tokigero's moral transition a lot better, in my opinion, but it also does a better job at showing how the bond between the two of them is one of accepting their sort of, like, a lot of the strength of their bond is kind of accepting their own moral failures and using that as motivation to not only overcome them but also compensate for what the other lacks. It's a very common trope, I guess, in a lot of ways. But here, just from seeing how their relationship evolves, I think is the best thing about this episode. Um, with that said, though, the episode also introduces us to the X-Laws, who are honestly a very interesting group of characters in this series to me. Because on one hand, I actually like the concept and idea of a group who has dedicated their lives to ending the threat of pretty much Hal. And as you'll find out, that pretty much does make for good moral conflict in terms of how it develops Yo and the others going forward. In fact, even just within this episode itself, you pretty much see that even if it was by forceful means, they have kind of already taught Yo a bit of a harsh lesson, which is his kindness, while the greatest feature about him, is what will also get him or his friends killed if he doesn't have the resolve to protect the things he loves. And it's a lesson and the interesting thing about this is that it's a lesson that people have tried to teach Yo many times over. But ultimately, in a lot of ways, Yo has just kind of skirted around the lesson and put his own spin on on the lesson without fully embracing it either. He's just because at the end of the day, Yo in a lot of ways is just too afraid what he'll become if he does take that lesson to heart. Like it's a lesson he knows knows he has to learn, but he's afraid to learn it in a lot of ways. And but the X laws are kind of the first ones to fully teach him that lesson. And even though he laughed off the whole even though he laughed off the fact that they pretty much beat him, like destroyed his sword at the end of the episode, it's a lesson that's going to stick with him from this point on. Um, Although, now having said that, because Shaman King is a series that came out in the 90s, it was a very, like, just the whole concept of the X laws in itself. It was a very early and experimental idea to make a character see things in absolutes of black and white, never mind a whole group. And if this had been my first experience with these kind of characters, I would actually think it's kind of unique, and in some ways it still is. But because we have gotten more updated and modern takes on the ideas of pretty much characters who think in morally black and white, the idea, the X laws themselves are already kind of showing their age a little bit just within their introduction. I mean, don't get me wrong. This episode definitely went pretty much more in depth with the X laws just within this first episode, and definitely more than the original anime ever did, for sure. But there is still the thing about the X laws is that there's kind of this lingering, like what do you call a Saturday morning cartoon villain vibe about them, and and a lot of it was in the original anime. I think a lot of that effect was more in the original anime, but I'd be lying if I said that there still wasn't a bit of a lingering effect there because of the time period that this series came out in its manga format. So yeah, I like the X laws overall, but at the same time, it's an idea. It's just an execution. It's an idea that is kind of teetering a little bit on undated. Again, just in its execution. One thing I can admit though that was better in the original anime though, was Lyserg's descent into becoming more accepting of the X laws. And this is kind of what I was talking about in my review of episode 14, or trying to get across anyway, is that even for someone like Lyserg, who's consumed with the idea of revenge, his transition after meeting the X, his transition into becoming more accepting of them, more accepting of the X laws methods, is a lot more forced for me than it was in the original anime. Again, it's kind of one of those weird trade-off things where while the reboot doesn't waste as much time as the original anime in getting to certain narrative points, it doesn't feel as earned, and it's some of the more emotional moments, I guess you could don't feel as emotionally earned as before, and it makes Lyserg come off as even more of a whiny little psychopath. Whereas before, I didn't like him, but in the original anime, I at least understood his feelings a little more as when he made the ultimate decision that he did. But yeah, here it's just it's a little bit rushed. I will admit this again, it's a little bit rushed compared to the original anime. The introduction of the X laws though also dives into the idea of the Seirei class of spirits. Ghosts who have existed since the pretty much dawn of time, really, and never had a life before that. So these are all ghosts who aren't like Basson and the others who lived as humans once. These are just full blown spirits, and it's getting into concepts of spirits that extend beyond how we know them. But also when you add the X laws into the mix, it kind of gets into a lot more of a horrific idea. These spirits weren't even paired up willingly with the X laws. They were kind of subjugated and enslaved. So yeah, that's kind of getting into some heavy detail there for sure. But yeah, guys, that's all I got for this review. If you enjoyed the video, like, comment, subscribe. On Twitter, Analyst, Crunchyroll. Be sure to hit the notification bell, hit the subscribe button, and just share it around, guys. Dead Night of Anime, signing off. Later.